And we are off to the races.
We fired the gun. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It is awesome to see you all here. Woo! Thank you. Thursday. Wow. Are we making it through the conference, right? Really, really. I think we see like motivation and stamina awards, right? For something or some of this. Feels that way, right? Really does. So we really appreciate you coming out. We really do. We're very excited to share with you a lot about the social intranet and what we're going to do with Yammer and SharePoint. And what we want to first focus on is what do you get out of this session? Because we're not up here for our benefit. We are up here for your benefit, okay? Which is why I try to come around and talk to some of you guys to understand what you're working on and see what's going on in your companies and some of the issues that you're facing. So always happy to have that dialogue, and we'll continue it out afterwards too. So firstly, what we want you to understand is really why you want to socialize your intranet. We're not going to go too deep in that, but we're going to sort of understand a little bit in terms of what is some of the interaction you're trying to drive and what is it that's important in your intranet that you want to socialize. The other aspect of this is we're really going to talk about Yammer Embed. So Embed is a functionality that comes out from the Yammer platform. Eric and I do not work for Microsoft, right? We are just trying to be practitioners. We are just trying to make it easy for you guys to use. So we just want to level set there. We're going to talk a lot about Yammer Embed and how to make it easy for you users, but we're not the product team. So, we're sorry we can't take your feedback, but we can certainly connect you with the right folks and on the right networks as well to take the feedback if you want to improve that too. So that's one of the things that we just want to make sure that you understand there. It's also that we want to make Embed easy for people to use, right? We want to make sure that people are getting their SharePoint experience, people who are site collection managers, who are site managers, page owners, etc. And we want to make sure that it's easy and a simple experience for them too.
We're also going to look at how we might be able to brand Embed, although it's not very brandable, but we'll look at things like design as well. Where's the best place to put Embed, how to put it on a site to help drive the user adoption of not only the people using Embed, but also your site content authors and site owners and whatnot. We'll look at some examples. We have a case study that Naomi and I worked on for a large company that hopefully will help you see what can be done. And we'll look at things like guidance, and we'll look at governance and some other things you'll need to think about when working with Yammer. But before we do get started, I do want to make sure we can introduce ourselves. This wonderful person to my right, if you've not had the benefit and fortune of meeting Miss Naomi Moneypenny, please consider yourself lucky now that you finally get to meet her. She's one of the smartest people I know. She's one of the most experienced people I know in Yammer. 2 days ago, she was awarded the most influential person in the Office 365. So, I mean, she's the best.
Oh, thank you, guys.
She's also on my SharePoint Office 365 MVP. She's Chief Technology Officer of many worlds. She's got more patents than all of us in this room combined on machine learning and anticipating computing. Thank you. That you can reach her at moneypenny.com, or my suggestion would be naomimoneypenny.com.
All right. And this wonderful person to my left is Eric Overfield, who is an amazing author, branding and UI expert, and really happy to be co-presenting with him today. Eric is the CEO at Pixel Mill, and he really looks at how we can actually influence both the branding and usability inside of SharePoint, but also on the intranet more generally. He's written a great book out there, or a number of great books, actually, and he is a SharePoint community organizer. He's many SharePoint Saturday events. If you're out on the West Coast, please come out and visit those. I speak at those too, but SharePoint communities are a fantastic place to be. So really, really excited to be here and to present about this.
All right. So the agenda, what we're actually going to do, this is hopefully, this looks familiar already, this is the WIFI, what's in it for you. We're going to first look at why we would want to socialize our intranet, because of course that's important before we get into the details. But this is a 300-level session, so what we want to do is quickly get into some of the implementation things. What's Embed look like? How are you going to use it? How are you going to integrate it? What kind of pieces of Yammer can you get out using Embed, and what can you not? Then what could you maybe get out using the REST API? We'll look then at learning from implementation, so you can see some of our best guidance and best suggestions from the battlefield, things that we've already done out there. So with that, I want to know, Naomi, please explain why should we be socializing our intranet?
Wow. And the first reason here really, it comes down to sort of three main categories. The first one is really around interactivity, right? That is the main reason we want to have people on our intranet. We want to get them engaged and get them excited, right? We want to think about the discussion and the content coming together. And it's really thinking about what it is that you can do with your intranet more generally. So how do I take the enterprise social network that I might be starting with Yammer? How do I surface up those conversations with a lot of the static content I already have on side of my intranet? But it goes a little bit further than that. Because you might have noticed that intranets have really changed, right? If you've been around in this area for a long time, then you've noticed that, it used to be the heroic effort, right? Where we'd all work on the project for, 3 months or 6 months or however long it took, and we'd create all this amazing content, and then it was done, right? And then we'd say, okay, in a year's time or something, we start refreshing it. Well, now we don't get that luxury anymore, right? So we have to keep going and keep going and keep going and keep faster. And yet we have to build more applications. So thinking about how we actually integrate applications into what we do in the social intranet of the future becomes even more important. So we want to add some interactivity in there. We want to understand a little bit in terms of what it is that people want from the engagement perspective, as well as how they adopt the intranet and adopt the applications that you want them to use inside of your social communities. And so we want to think about, too, how we can onboard new users into the system, right? I think that's the most important thing, whether you're changing job inside of the company or whether you're actually looking at new hires coming in or onboarding completely new people into the company, or even if you have consultants and contractors and networks of people that you're working with. Today's modern workplace is very different to how it is before. Right? We have a lot more external contractors coming in. You maybe have outsourcers. You have a lot of, how can I put this, a Venn diagram that's becoming very, very messy, right, of all these intersections and how things are working. So thinking about what kinds of intranet content we supply to them and how we socialize that content becomes even more important. The next thing is really understanding around knowledge bases, right? How do we extend that knowledge base around? Looking at the conversations that are going on inside of your community and how you can actually put that stuff inside of your intranet and capture it. We want to have a different source of knowledge these days. It's not enough to just have the static pages that we've all worked on from a social intranet perspective. We really have to think about how do we extend those conversations into the content that we work with, and then really think about how do we capture the content that is most important to us. And that's really part of our overall knowledge management strategy. So those are kind of the 3 main buckets on what's really important in terms of really socializing the content on your intranet. And I'm going to hand it over to Eric, who's going to talk to you a little about the spectrum of options that we have for integration.
So we've got Yammer, we have SharePoint, we've got these 2 different systems, and we know that Yammer has got some good APIs that are able to pull data out of Yammer. So what kind of integration methods are available? Well, out of the box, straightly available to us, is the Yammer embed. It's a really simple tool. Basically, this would be a tool that it's JavaScript-based. You'll be integrating it into your site using a simple JavaScript snippet. You might put it into some simple script editor web part, which we'll go into more detail later. You also have things like a follow button, a share button, a follow, share, like, which are social gestures. They're really simple tools, very quickly to add. That will be the first demo that we'll show, and it's nice and simple. There are very limited controls for display, though, and so that's one of the catches. It's pretty difficult to brand. Another component or another issue with it is that it does require copying and pasting of JavaScript, a little HTML. A lot of us in this room hopefully feel very comfortable with that, but a lot of content authors and site owners, if you've worked with some, I'm sure you have, they're not always the most knowledgeable in HTML, so that could get a little difficult. So the second idea would be to enhance these out-of-the-box JavaScript functionality by creating more of a solution for your content authors and site owners to make it easier to use embed. What you might be doing here is adding some sort of wrapper, maybe like an app part or a web part that you'll build, dependent upon if you're on-prem or in the cloud or how you want to deploy your custom solution, that will wrap embed to make it a lot easier to use so that your site owner doesn't really need to know about embed. They just know how to go and add that specific app part, that follow app part or that my feed app part, and all of a sudden they now have it. That app part is very similar to what Yammer already has. Yammer does have an app part. They replaced their SharePoint web part, basically with this app part. What we're going to show in a second demo is a way how to enhance that and how to control the code on your own. Then finally, if you need full control, if this little clicker will work, if you need a lot more control of how you will integrate Yammer with SharePoint, you're going to be looking at the REST API. The REST API gives you a lot more control. Basically, you can just request data from Yammer, and then you can go ahead and integrate that data however you want. There's some software development kits for that. There's something to think about, though. As of now, the REST API does not have everything you may need. You may ask for things and it's not there. Something that I can think of off the top of my head would be being able to really administer groups and group administrators. That's not fully there yet. A key thing to think about with the REST API is there is good documentation. It talks about all the endpoints that are available to you. If you find an endpoint that wasn't documented, our suggestion, don't use it. You're going to hurt yourself because chances are they're going to change it on you. Your solution will have been built by this. Naomi can give you plenty of examples of how that happened to some people she's worked with, so make sure you stick with the documentation. Also, the REST API has some data throttling. Basically, you can only make so many requests per minute per user per token. Right now, it's somewhere in the order of 10 requests per 30 seconds, which you can easily go over with doing the wrong thing. But that's a fuzzy number, and as Naomi's explained to me before, there's lots of different tiers, which aren't really documented. When I've asked Yammer, they're like, we don't really know. So those are our three main options. So let's go ahead and now look at embed. We'll just give a quick overview of what embed might look like before we get into actually coding that up, or before we show any kind of demo. Yammer embed allows you to add any kind of like group feed or a my feed or maybe a topic feed to anywhere on a site. This, of course, we're focusing on SharePoint, but you can mostly add it anywhere. So you can see here just an example site, and we've dumped in a feed. Pretty nice and simple, and it adds a lot of functionality. This uses JavaScript, just a JavaScript snippet, which is nice because it's a consistent interface, so we can use the same code and put it on any site we may have. I think that's really good and beneficial. Clicker doesn't seem to like to be working with me. Another cool piece. Now, as I said before, Yammer already discontinued their SharePoint web part. One of the reasons why they did that was because it was very difficult to maintain, because as soon as they gave it to you, if they updated that, you had to reinstall something. Now with Yammer Embed, they maintain the code for you, and you can get any updates as they're released. Really good stuff. They also have SSO, single sign-on, already integrated, and it works pretty well. They also have a growing documentation, which of course is important for us. I'm giving you the URL here, developer.yammer.com/v1.0/doc/embed. Or just go to Bing and type in Yammer embed documentation. You're going to get this link right quick. So I know that's not everything, though, Naomi. What else can we do? Where else can we use embed, and what other functions are available to us?
Wow. Where can't we use embed, I think, is probably the answer. So, okay, I'm going to start right at the beginning. So who's vintage, who's retro, and still running SharePoint 2007? Come on.
Oh.
Woo! Oh, wow. Okay, all right, good.
I just lost
I'm
a
good.
bet.
I was like, be proud. Come on, be proud. It's all good. But you can still use Yammer Embed, right? It's all good. You can still use Yammer Embed. Now, whether your browser can take it is a whole different matter, but you can still run Yammer Embed inside of SharePoint 2007. All right, SharePoint 2010. Come on, people. All right, okay, all right, that's quite a lot. Wow, that's interesting. All right, good to know, too. So SharePoint 2010, Yammer Embed's definitely been around that long and can certainly still run in that environment, too. And then SharePoint 2013, on-prem, folks. All right, okay. And Eric's got his hand up, too. Yes, on-prem, be proud. All right. And then SharePoint Online. For people who are probably already running SharePoint 2016 but don't know.
Good,
okay,
good
all right, that's probably it. And then, of course, SharePoint 2016, which looks just like SharePoint 2013, but you don't know you're running the next code base yet, okay? So that's something to be aware of. It just out on the SharePoint Online when you're using it there. If you see that little version call, switch over to 15 in your URL. You're probably already running SharePoint 2016. You just don't know, okay? So if you went to the roadmap session, you saw probably a lot of stuff behind the scenes. They haven't done anything too much on the web interface yet. So, you know, we're waiting on that new user experience. But Yammer Embed will definitely work inside of it. So it's something to be aware of. But we can also use Yammer Embed in lots of other things, right? We're going to focus on SharePoint in this session, but we can also use it if you're using WordPress internally, if you're using Drupal, if you're using Salesforce, if you're using Dynamics, right? You can use the same Yammer Embed code in all of these other content managements and other platform services that you might be using. And so I think that's a really important thing to notice, right? The great benefit of having embed is really this JavaScript that you can use anywhere. And the fact that Yammer is actually managing it, as Eric mentioned, right, that's really important, right, to be able to notice for the future and how you actually integrate it into other solutions and other things that you build. We're going to talk a little bit later on about sort of the evolution of the social intranet. But, you know, first of all, we have to understand a little bit more in terms of how to actually use embed.
So using embed, let's go ahead and look at a tool that Yammer created for us, and it's their embed widget, configuration widget. Now another URL for you to remember, but again, the best way I find this, because I don't ever remember this URL, I go to Bing, I type in Yammer embed widget, or Yammer embed configure, any of those will quickly bring up this URL. When you go to this URL, you're going to get a nice little screen that shows you a little panel that says, hey, what is it that you want to do? Fill this out. All you do now is you start adding some fields. Not very well documented, so let's go over some important ones. One of the important things you're going to do is say what kind of feed type you want. Do you want a my feed? Do you want a group feed? Do you want a topic? Do you want an open graphed object, which is a really cool feature. We're going to go off into more detail in a little bit. The next thing you'll probably want to set as true is SSO. Do you want SSO? Do you want single sign-on? Yes, I'm sure almost every time you're going to want to do that. Now this is another interesting one, the canonical network. So what happens with embed, which is another great tool, is at the top of a feed is going to be this ability for you to put in another thread, another post, right? Now if someone is logged into Yammer and they go to your portal, and they're logged into not your network, not your home network, embed's going to probably say, oh, well, they're logged into this other network. What you can do at the top is you can provide your network feed, your specific network permalink, your network. That would be at the top option. If you do that, you'll make sure that the embed feed is going to pull the my feed from that particular network. But that doesn't necessarily mean that when they add a comment in, that's going to go to that specific network. So the other important thing to set almost every time is canonical network, set that to true as well. That makes sense. So what we're trying to do is making sure when anyone adds a comment, no matter how many networks they may be logged to or different browser sessions they might have open, you'll make sure that when they put something into that feed at the top of an embed feed, it will actually go to the proper home network. There's another set of options that can get very confusing, which is the metadata, and that's used for the Open Graph object feeds. Some important things here, though, is the embedly preview. So embedly preview is how Yammer goes out and creates a preview of a document or an Open Graph object that you've created. If you're kind of confused on Open Graph object, don't worry. We're going to go into that into great detail in just a little bit. But there's a whole other section, and if you say, I want the feed to be Open Graph object, you get all these other options as well. So you just fill out this form. You go ahead and click that Apply Changes, and then all of a sudden, the JavaScript code snippet is created at the bottom. What's then cool is on the right-hand side of this page, it's going to show you a preview of what that feed's going to look like. It's then going to be able to have it, you're ready to go. I mean, in a sense, you now have almost everything you need to add this feed into a site. Some other things we wanted to highlight, though, is your network name. Do you want it to display or not? That's your network name is up at the top. Do you want to hide or show the header or the footer? These are things that all you can do is hide or edit, show. You cannot actually edit what's in them. What else have we got there? The prompt text is another one. So if you're trying to help engage a user in your actual content, that's the prompt text. And you can customize the prompt text when you're configuring that feed. So I know that embed, though, we talked about, can do more than just feeds. So Naomi, what else can it do? What else can we use it for?
All right, the so-called social gestures. Following, liking, and sharing. These should all seem very familiar from another consumer site that you're probably a member of. All right. So the first thing we want to think about is following, right? So this concept of following that we have in Yammer. And before I do that, I'm going to ask, who's using Yammer Enterprise? Come on, put your hands up.
Oh, nice. There
all right,
we go.
All right, good to know. All right, who's still cheap and using the Yammer free? Okay,
yeah,
all right, me too. It's okay. It's all right. All right, it's all good. It's all good. So I just wanted to talk about that just a little bit. But there, you can still use a lot of this technology, even if you're still on the Yammer freemium version. It's all good. All right, this Yammer embed is still there and it still works. So following, liking, and sharing. So these are actions that we want to add to a lot of our pages. And sometimes it's a very simple thing that we want to start off with our social intranet. So if you do nothing else, you know, being able to have the ability for people to join the groups that are relevant to them by following a specific group or following a specific individual. If you have a site manager or a site owner who wants to be followed on Yammer, that's a good way to do it. You can add this little button on there. You can also follow groups. You can follow topics as well. So one of the things that we have in Yammer is a folksonomy type of data. So if you have a site collection or a site that you're already working on and you have a bunch of tags that are already associated with that, you could have similar tags inside of Yammer in that folksonomy, or you could be adding to that folksonomy in Yammer and then have people be able to follow that topic inside of Yammer too. We really want to push this in terms of social interaction, right? It's a very simple gesture to add these things to a page, right? The ability to like a page, right? And if you get no likes, then you know that content's probably useless, right? I mean, it's a good way to know, right? Well, oftentimes in our intranet, we have a lot of sort of dead pages and a lot of dead information, but adding a little bit of interactivity really helps to understand whether this content is useful to people, whether they're able to have some conversation about it, what else they would like to see about it. And so understanding a little bit more in terms of how to make this easy for people is really important. So, you know, we want to make this a simple process for people, right? We want to be able to have the following, the liking, the sharing on there. We want to make it very easy for people to interact, but we want to make it very easy for the site owner, the page owners, etc., to be able to put this stuff on there. We're going to look a little bit in terms of, you know, adding things to these pages, but we're also going to look at how to add this as a web part or an app part inside of the inside of your solution inside of SharePoint. So, you know, following, liking, and sharing, it's a great way to sort of kick off this idea of an open graph object. And an Open Graph object is something that's been around for quite a long time. It's actually a consumer standard. It's out on Facebook, Twitter, etc. They all use this sort of Open Graph protocol. We've heard a lot about Office Graph, right, in the last few days. So don't get Open Graph and Office Graph kind of confused. But they're sort of similar. They're both graphing technologies, like everything's a graph right now. Yeah, it's like the term du jour, right? Everything is a graph, which is, I'm happy, I'm an astrophysicist, graphing is good, right? Just means relationships between things, right, if you were wondering. So, but that graph is really, the Open Graph standard has been around for quite a long time. And so you want to be able to have a specific object identified by its URI, right? Its URL or its URI. So the ability to do that allows us to have the following, the liking, the sharing, actually creates an Open Graph object behind the scenes. It means that any comments or conversations or gestures that are associated with that URL can be surfaced to something else later on. So, I'm going to show you a little bit about that later on, but right now, Eric's going to demo a little bit in terms of how to put embed on a page.
So this looks cool, right? Are you getting the story, making some sense? We've talked about this cool tool. I mean, now it's time to actually see it work, right? We want to see it actually work. Some head nods or something. Excellent. Perfect.
Yes, we are social people. We will need you to actually interact with us because this is a social intranet session. Yes, thank you. Thank you, guys. I need thumbs up, likes, head nods, a thumbs down if you're that kind of person.
And
I will find you later. But yes, we do need that. So.
I see some people standing, so I also want to say at this point that I just want to steal this line from Mark Cashman. Let's go ahead and defrag a little, people, we can add some more seats. So please, if you're sitting, there's plenty of seats in the middle and the front. Okay, what we have here is just a demo site. This is a SharePoint online site. And what we want to do is we want to add a Yammer embed feed on the right. One of the quickest ways to add a Yammer embed feed is if you go to a specific group, which I will eventually find, and we scroll on down to the bottom right. I'm not on a feed yet, so I want to add the all-company group. And on the lower right-hand side, this was going to bump in a second, but it says over on the lower hand right, embed this group in your site. If you go ahead and click on that, you're going to get some really nice JavaScript. That's going to be everything that you need to get started. It's going to be a div that you need in order for embed to actually add its control stuff, its HTML and whatnot, into a specific container. That's the div. Underneath that is going to be a script. I know this is going to be a little small. Don't worry. I'll make it a little bigger in a second. And then underneath that is going to be a whole bunch of JavaScript. So one of the things I like to do is I just go and copy and paste that. Even though I might customize it a little bit, it gives me everything I need. We can go back to our SharePoint site. I'm going to go ahead and edit this page here. And I'm going to add a web part. The web part I recommend here is the script editor web part. It's available in all your tenants, so it's easy to use. Now, you may decide to put this in your master pages or page layouts. Does that sound about, those are terms we all know, I hope, here. This is a 300 level, so I'm going to keep going. Very easy to do as well. You're just going to add that code directly in line into your HTML, your master pages or page layouts, dependent upon what you need. But in this case, I'm going to add a web part. I'm going to go ahead and add from the media and content of the script editor web part. I'm sure most of you have used this web part quite a bit in the past. And once this eventually loads up, I'm going to edit the script, and I'm going to paste in what I just had. So far, so good? Excellent. All right, so then what I want to do now is I'm going to go back to that configuration tool I talked about that was at the yammer.com embed/configure, and I've already pre-filled some of this out. I put in my network permalink here. Let me zoom in just a little bit. I've already said that I want my feed, so I want my Yammer my feed, the logged in user's feed from our network permalink. I want to default to canonical. I want to go ahead and use SSO. I want to show the header and the footer, but I don't want to hide the network name. And at the bottom, I get this CSS JavaScript code. I'll eventually get the right term out. So this JavaScript code, now that I have this code, I can copy and paste this, and I could go ahead and go back to my site and replace just the JavaScript code, which requires me to know JavaScript. Now, again, most of us, this is easy stuff, but for a lot of content authors who don't know any way how to do any kind of editing of content besides copying and pasting into Word, how we know that works so well in old versions of SharePoint, this might be a little difficult for them, but that's what we found. But it still works. So let me go ahead and save that page. And what we should see, if everything went well, is in the upper left right-hand corner.
There we go.
We're going to get our my feed. That's pretty easy. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Now you can get different feeds. You can get group feeds. I could have set your feed ID. If you ever need to get a feed ID, basically you go back to a specific feed that you may want. Let's go to the engineering feed here. I scroll up in the upper right-hand corner. Let me zoom in. You get your feed ID right up there. If I just took those digits, those numbers, and I dumped it into the configuration tool under my feed ID, I could have gotten that feed as well. Okay. So what we also want to do now is, let's say we want to add some social gestures. So we're going to a team site and we want to add a like, follow, share. How can we do that? This one's going to be a little more tricky just because we're going to have to go to the documentation to get this code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that documentation page that I talked about. If you ever get lost, Yammer, embed, documentation, great Bing search, you're going to get to this URL. In the lower left-hand corner under Yammer embed, you'll find something that says Open Graph Buttons. Go ahead and click on that, and you'll find some code here. This should look very similar to what we just had for liking and following. There's another one that I'm going to use as well under social actions. Under social action, there's a share button. Now, the share button, I didn't click on it. Let me click on it. There it goes. Now, the share button requires its own script and its own specific div, which you're seeing in the middle of the screen. That's kind of a shame. But what you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste all of that stuff that you want into another script editor web part. So let's go ahead and do that. Or again, you could add this directly into a page layout or into a master page. All right, so I'm going to edit the page. It's editing. I'm going to add a web part. I'm going to go back to my media and content. I'm going to add my script editor. I'm going to click add. Is it linking? No. There we go. And edit script. All right, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to grab the code, and then we'll go over this. It would be, whoops, wrong one. It's going to be this one. And I want all of this. Now let me just quickly go over what we've got here in this code. So I've grabbed the two scripts that I need because I'm going to add liking and sharing and following. So I need two scripts at the top. Underneath that, I need my three different divs. Those divs are where Yammer Embed is going to put those three different actions because it needs one div per action. Now you'll see some inline styling in there. Please don't normally do that. Please give them styles so that your content authors don't have to think of this. But for ease of use, so that you can see the styling in line, you can see all I'm trying to do is float the buttons next to each other, and I'm going to give them width so they look all nice and pretty. I then add my simple scripts, which you see the first two are action buttons for liking and following, and at the bottom, sharing. Very simple code. You can put this on any page you wanted, basically, and this will work. All right, so let me go ahead and copy that. I will go ahead and paste that. Insert. Stop editing. And let's go ahead and let's see if those buttons actually load. Not too bad. We got share. The other two will come up here in a second, or they should.
They will.
The network has been a little not quick, right, for a lot of us. There we go. Oh,
It's coming. It's coming.
it was loading, so let me go ahead and try that again.
Sorry.
Again,
Any of you
don't
guys
blow-
done this already on your intranet? Have you added follow, like, share buttons? One person.
One person.
One person. Two people. All right. Brave people can put up their hands. Good. Defy gravity. Put up your hands. It's
Yes.
okay. All right. It works. All right.
That's a
All
topic.
right, so 4 people.
So yes,
All right,
you can
good.
do a feed that's based on a topic. Yeah. So we can see that we can like and follow. If I go ahead and follow my button, if I do this all correctly, if I go back to my group, if I go back to my feed on this network, if this all works out really well, dependent upon the network, and I do want it to go quickly, I'm not going to let this load. I'll come back to this on the second demo. But basically, it would have showed that I started liking that page. Pretty cool, pretty simple, pretty quick, right?
Yes.
All right, so let's move on, though. Let's go ahead and I think personally that could be easier. So Naomi, what can we do to make this a little easier for us?
I think we can make it a lot easier for users, right? So thinking about the folks that you work with every day, so thinking about maybe some of the page owners, the site owners. So, do they usually have to add JavaScript into their web parts? Is that something they like doing?
I don't think so.
No, I don't see any people going, oh yeah, I love to do that. I love doing that, right? No, that's awesome. All right, so what we've really done is to try to make this process a little simpler for users, right? We really want to think about that. So what we've done is basically create a way for you to add the embed scripting options and do it by a web part or an app part, depending on what you're running, whether it's on premises or it's in the cloud, right? So we have the ability to do that. So we're very proud to show our GitHub project. It's out there. The URL is out there. So it's open source code. You can take this code and modify it for your own organizations, most importantly. But it's really providing a simple, easy way. It's basically a solution out there that you can deploy inside of your own forms and make it very simple for people to be able to add a web part into SharePoint and adjust all those configuration options that we saw in the Yammer configuration option, right? We put all of those things, they're all inside of SharePoint, and you're able to do that very simply. And so it's a simple experience. It's it's kind of a wrapper that's really going around the Yammer embed. It's a simple experience in that we want to make it easy for people to really use SharePoint and the tools that they already know how to use. And then finally, we really wanted to make it simple for people who are actually on the receiving end of that content, so they can actually do follow like shares, like make it very simple for those page owners too. So, we're very excited about this stuff, and we're going to show you a quick demo of how all that works.
Okay, so this demo here, what we're going to do, or what we're going to show off, is some of these Visual Studio solutions that we created. We created two of them, one for full trust and another one that's designed to be for deploying to the cloud, deploying to SharePoint Online or into your App Store. So that's going to be app parts. The full trust will be web parts. You can download this code right now. I tested it, I think, yesterday, and it still is working good. So I think it's good stuff. The code, there's a lot in there. I'm going to go over the basics of it. I'm only going to go over app parts because, again, I don't have time for everything, and I think a lot of you coders, you'll see the code and go, oh, yeah, it's pretty simple. All we're really trying to do is just go through embed and make it easier for end users by just having to add a app part, and then in the edit toolpart, the edit web part tool pane, they can just set the options they need. No cutting and pasting and things like that. So sound good? Another good thing that would be helpful for us all here?
Yes.
Woo!
All right, thank you guys. Thank you. Come on.
Okay, what I wanted to quickly show was, this is what I wanted to show is on the recent activity. It shows that I'm following, and I am now following that engineering site. So that's where we would see here that when I followed, we got this recent activity. All right, let's go back to this page. We're going to go ahead and replace this embed feed with a app part, which I've already installed, but I'll go over the part here in a second. And then we're going to replace social actions with maybe an app part that can give us some social gestures. So the code itself, those of you that work with Visual Studio, this should look pretty simple and also very similar to a normal app. I've created an app part, a whole bunch of app parts. I'm going to look at the embed one. The embed app part basically has an element exe file and XML file, and all we're doing here is we're going to provide the properties required that we're going to ask our users to fill out, and they'll just fill these out in an edit web part tool pane or edit app part tool pane, I suppose. There's just a whole bunch of them, and those properties are going to be sent into the content URL at the top, all the way over here to the right. All right, easy stuff. So the next thing that we need to have is we need to have the app endpoint. This is just a very simple file as well. What we're going to do here is we're going to automatically go and grab that JavaScript file and include that for the end user, so the end user doesn't have to, the content author doesn't have to know about how to get to the Yammer embedded JavaScript. We're going to add our own JavaScript that we're going to use, and then we're going to go ahead and take a function that we created and go ahead and trigger that function, a JavaScript function. It's all JavaScript based. Now, if you were doing this in the full trust web part, the web part's very similar. It's just going to be using C# to do a lot of this kind of code. So in the app.js file, under our primary object we created that draw function we just saw. There's a lot of code here. Most of it is basically going and grabbing all the different elements that are needed from the properties that the end user is going to set. One of the important things it does is it creates that div. It creates a div that's going to be needed for embed to actually embed this. But again, the end user now doesn't have to worry about IDs or adding any kind of divs. You're going to handle all that for them. We then create an options object, a JavaScript object, where we're going to store all these properties. So in embed, we saw that it was a simple function with some variables underneath it. Basically, it was an object with some JavaScript variables. We're just setting that variable up here. We're going to set a lot of those same things that you saw in embed, things like use SSO. That's actually misspelled. That should be a UE. I've got some changing to do. If it header or footer should be there, if you want to hide the network name, etc. There's a whole group for Open Graph Object. And then at the bottom, that's the exact same function, the JavaScript function that embed that we would have used if we copied and pasted embed and put it directly into a script editor, web part, or a master page. So really simple stuff. So what I've then done is I've already installed this app, so it's now available to us. This is not a true app session, so if you need help with that, there's plenty of great sessions on how to do that here at Ignite. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this page here. I'm going to remove this web part, the script editor web part, because we no longer need it. And then I'm going to go ahead and now add a web part again. And under apps, we'll see that there's a whole bunch of apps that I've already created. These are the apps that are included in that solution that you would just install into your app store, and that you can then add the app to the site collection and then go ahead and use it. Pretty simple stuff. So I'm going to add a embed feed. I'll click on add. So now that was easy, right? Just add a web part. I can now edit a web part. I mean, most content authors, I think, know how to add web parts and they know how to edit properties. So this is a pretty good experience, I think. They can just go down and they can set some specific objects or specific properties. So these bottom three here, Yammer, embed, wrapper, embed, JavaScript settings, and open graph settings, those are all added in that, that initial elements.xml file, those properties. So something that I may want to do is I want to say, hey, you know, the network permalink is really 11cell.com. I want to do the my feed, which is good. I will say I want single sign-on. I can set feed IDs if I want, all kinds of other things. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and then click on Save. Now, this is not too much different than what Yammer already provides. So what's the value of this? What I like about this is you could create a my feed app part that has all those other options removed. You could add a group app part that has no open graph. They don't have to set any of the feeds they want. All they have to do is set a feed ID. So with this simple, very simple solution, you can make all of your own custom code, and that to me makes a solution that will help drive adoption, not only from your content visitors, because they'll just use the tool, but for your content authors, so they don't say, hey, this is too hard. We want to make it easy. But basically, you just see my feed just show up. I think that's a lot simpler, isn't it? Nice and easy. Cool. Okay, let's go on and quickly just change one more page before we move on with this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete these three, this web part, so that I don't have these three options. And I'm going to go ahead and add back in the follow, the follow social gesture. So I'll add a part. This is always the fun one to add: app, follow, add. There is one little trick here for app parts. If you're full trust, not as big a deal, but for app parts, there is. I'm getting an error when this first loads. What's happening is, has anyone built apps for SharePoint yet? A few people? You know that apps are put into an iframe, right? That's kind of a problem for a lot of us branding folk, kind of painful. That's still the case here. The follow and like embed open graph object social gestures, they're going to use the URL of the current page that it's in as the thing that will like and follow. That's a problem. It's going to try to like the iframe URL and not the parent URL. And there's no good communication we can do between those iframes, right? That's that security model. So what we really need to do is we need to edit this app part and provide the URL of the current page that we want to like or follow. But this is still a lot easier than a lot of copying and pasting. So I'm going to go down here to this open graph URL. Now what I do need to do is remove the query string, because that's not going to be helpful for us. So eventually I will go ahead and get to the end of that. There we go. Click OK. Stop editing. So except for the fact that I needed to add a URL, pretty simple, right? And I was able to quickly and easily add a follow button using an app part instead of having to do all this copying and pasting. Pretty cool? Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to this. If you need that URL, it's here, and we also have it at the end of the slide deck as well.
All right. So is that going to make your lives easier? Yes?
Cool.
Good? All right. So Eric and I, our nights and weekends have not been for nothing, right? We're so happy. All right. That's a good thing. All right, let's talk a little bit about where we should use embed, right? We've talked about why we should use embed, why we should socialize your intranet. We've talked a little bit now about how to use embed. We've gone through all the configuration options. We've made it easier for you to actually deploy this into your farms and deploy it on a much bigger scale than just, hey, copy paste every time you need to add a web part. Now we're really going to talk about where to use embed. And so we're going to walk through some of the user experience considerations first off.
Cool. So I want to look for some quick wins for you. I want to make this really easy for everyone to buy off and say, yes, this makes sense. One of the first places I think that embed will work really well is on your portal homepage. One of the things you can do is you can quickly add like a my feed. You can maybe add a group departmental feed. So maybe a CorpCom wants to have their messaging happen through Yammer, which makes total sense. They want to be able to post messages every day or whatnot that then show up on your portal homepage, but then could have that two-way, three-way, four-way conversation because people can communicate directly on the portal homepage and add their thoughts and whatnot. Great stuff. From a UX perspective, where might these elements go? My recommendation on something like a portal homepage would be what we like to call the railed experience. This should be probably on the outside rails of your site. You'll want to avoid navigational conflicts, though, and what I mean by that is we're used to navigation being in certain parts of certain pages. You probably don't want to get in the way of that. So you might have these feeds on the upper right-hand side, which makes sense. We normally don't do a lot of navigation there, or maybe in the lower left-hand side. This would be a great spot to also add a link directly to Yammer, though, to your Yammer network. So again, it's easy for people to extend the conversation past your portal. Moving on, another great thing we can do is add Yammer embed directly to team sites or our collaboration sites. We can augment document libraries this way. We can add a group feed so that they easily be able to communicate within the group and add more threads and conversation around the specific collaboration site. Something here, I'm thinking more that you'll put the content, you'll put the feed more in the body of the content, or the body of the page, rather than being a Rails experience, but you could. But I think making it a little more obvious might be good. The third thing that I can think is a really great win is on specific article or content pages. So on article or content pages, this is a really cool feature of Yammer, is you can have a embedded threaded conversation on a specific page that's based around this open graph object. Pretty cool stuff. And another thing you might be looking to do is add social gestures here so that people can like and they can follow the specific page so they know if something's happening to it or if it's been updated. Another great thing, of course, is that you can share things. So I really like this open graph object, though, Naomi. So let's go into more detail on what we can do with open graph.
All right, Open Graph is probably one of my most favorite features actually in the Yammer stack and now across Office 365. I get so excited about this feature just because of the ideas of what we can do in the future with this stuff. So the first thing I wanted to show you here is this is an Office 365 video. So people using Office 365 video service? Yes?
Isn't that really cool?
It is
I've
the coolest thing, right?
It's cool.
It really is. And it has this Yammer little icon at the top there, and you can actually drop down that, and it'll fly out this little Yammer pane called Document Conversations. And we're starting to see that pane on a lot of other things. We're seeing it inside of our OneDrive experience. We're starting to see it inside of SharePoint too. So anytime that you open up a document, you're going to have this idea of a document conversation on the side. And the whole premise around this is really understanding, usually I would send a document in email, I would have all the conversation that was going on about that specific content, right? And I'd have it on, an email, and I'd have to switch backwards and forwards between the content and what was going on. But now I can actually have these two experiences together. I can have the conversation on the side, and I can have the content that's most important to me in the front. So I can actually see what I'm looking at and talk about, the different discussion points in the PowerPoint deck or the Word document or this, in this case, this Office 365 video. So really thinking about, okay, we can have this conversation. That's great stuff. It all gets stored in Yammer, so I can get it, some other time. And I could also add a topic on here, right? So I can actually add a topic to this conversation that's going on. So think about that, right? When we're thinking about a future-proofing type of scenario. We want to use this conversation in a different way later on. And that's what really becomes really important for Open Graph generally. So thinking about what we could do later on, we can take those conversations that are actually part of that topic, or a specific group in this case even, and we can actually surface it up in a different way in a team site or a publishing site or some other way inside of our SharePoint intranet. So it's a great way to be able to collect together all the different conversations about specific documents or just one document. If you're going through a marketing campaign, you're iterating on something for a very long time, and think about collect that conversation up, and then I can take that conversation and surface it up in another place somewhere else. It's a really cool idea, right, to be able to think about that. Instead of all this stuff that gets locked away inside of emails and locked away inside of other content management systems, instead we're really thinking about how do we surface up these conversations and make them useful for people in other places at a different time. And that really takes us on to looking at what from an experience perspective. So, you'll notice that it's kind of gray and white, and those boxes are pretty simple, right? Embed is pretty vanilla out of the box. So there are a few sort of design considerations that we might want to think about. So if branding is a big thing inside of your organization, you might want to consider some other options too.
So yeah, I think that branding this is important. Now there's two different ways that we might be able to embed Yammer into SharePoint. And there's going to be what I like to call this kind of the ease of maintenance method, which we know is what Yammer embed that we've been talking about. And then there's also the REST API, which we'll talk about in a second. So this was working really well before. There we go. So I'm going to stick a little closer here. So the Yammer embed we showed is very simple to add, but it has almost no branding ability besides the wrapper that you've put it in. So that div that we saw, you can style that div. You can add some sort of Chrome around it, but you can't really style anything in it. Some ways that I've seen people get around it is they might place absolutely positioned divs on top of embed. That's actually the demo that you saw. So you can fake it a little bit, but it's pretty limited. But it's really easy to use, so you've got this give and take. Now, Yammer Embed has a responsive element built in. When I was at the Yammer site and I clicked the embed get the Yammer embed code right there, and I got some JavaScript and that HTML already set, they will have set the div for you automatically 400 pixels. And the reason why is if your embed div, the wrapper div, ever gets less than 400 pixels wide, then you're going to get this skinny mode, for good or bad. The other thing to think about is with embed, Yammer's only going to support embed to the browsers they're supporting, basically IE8 or IE9. So if you need to be able to support IE8 or IE9, then you're probably going to want to look at another solution if you need to include Yammer, which will probably be the REST API. Now, the other things that we might want to worry about now, of course, is on mobile display. We're going to want our embed to work in mobile display. You're probably going to be doing this by adding some JavaScript. There's some client-side JavaScript that you can run, and you can get triggered on certain events, which we're going to see in a little bit. But what you might end up doing, though, is basically assessing for your own specific use case and what you're trying to do. You'll be using some JavaScript, maybe some HTML to make this look okay, but remember, you really can't brand it. If you want to do something where you need tight control of your content, which is actually our third demo, or kind of third thing we're going to show you, is the implementation that Naomi and I did that was based on the REST API, because we want to show you what you could do. You've already seen Yammer Embed. We also want to show you what else you can do. With the REST API, you can basically request the data directly from Yammer. Yammer will send it back to you in more of a raw data, and you can now do whatever you want with it. You can display it whatever way you want. You also have all of those social actions as well. So pretty good stuff. Now, there's more to this, though, besides just adding embed. So what else do we have to worry about?
Oh, there's quite a few things that we have to worry about, Eric, right?
Yeah.
There really are.
Seems
yes.
like it.
So it's never that simple, right? We know we all work in IT. It's never that simple, right? So it's all good. All right, let's talk about the thorny issues around authentication and permissions. Get excited, right? So that's right. So let's talk about authentication first off. So you saw the configuration in there, right? There's this nice little configuration that says use SSO to be true. Okay, and that's really important. So for the folks who are using the Yammer free, I'm sorry guys, you don't get this. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to point you guys out because you're right there. So shame hat. No, there we go. It's all right. So for the folks who are using the free, you don't get to do the SSO. But one of the great benefits of using Yammer Enterprise is that you're able to use SSO. Now, there are lots of different flavors of SSO, and I'm going to talk about those in just a few minutes. But one of the great things is that Embed is a first-party application. And that's Microsoft speak for saying that they came out with it, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason that they can use SSO and all the other applications in the world, that includes your own that you build with the REST API that have to do with OAuth, and you have to do all the token management and all that stuff that we got used to. So as some of our folks know, it's a little bit messy sometimes to have to work on authentication and in looking at what you can do with the REST API versus Embed. I will encourage you to use Embed as much as possible, just because, again, it's maintained by Yammer, the JavaScript is there, and single sign-on is an easier experience generally. Now, there's some other things we need to think about, right? Because Yammer has this ability to have public and private groups. So public groups inside of Yammer means it's public inside of your organization. So it's the transparency of the conversations that are going on. So be aware that even if people haven't signed up for Yammer, they'll be able to actually see some of those conversations if SSO is true inside of your organization, right? So even if they're just visiting a team site or a publishing site or whatever experience you're delivering to them, they're going to see the content from those public groups. But the story is different for private groups. Of course, private groups are, membership control groups inside of your organization. So the ability to have that SSO there says, okay, hey, I could check you as a user, and if you don't have access to this stuff, you're going to get a nice little login box. It's kind of an annoying experience, and people might actually wonder about that. So you got to think through that usability and that experience to see what is going on. Let's go ahead, question. All right, that's a good question.
That's a great question.
I must have answered that question 1 billion times in the last 2 days. But anyway, so no, that's a good question. So from the question was, are these groups inside of Yammer different from the Office 365 groups? Okay, and it's a good question. All right, so we have to think about groups, so I'm going to do a little tangent on groups for a side. So groups really are a new structure inside of Office 365. And they're a bridging way of basically taking AD groups, so the Active Directory groups, which have nothing to do with Yammer groups right now. So the groups that you have for permissioning and single sign-on inside of your Active Directory experience. And then we have groups that you actually are using for teams and collaborations and people who need to work together in a specific group. The great thing about Office 365 groups is they can act as a hub, right? They basically take those security groups as well as this group structure where all these other services feed into it. Now, if we take that sort of meta layer, that hub layer basically of Office 365 groups, we've got SharePoint coming in as a service, we've got OneDrive coming in as a service, we've got Yammer that's about to come in as a service, right? Not quite there yet, as we saw on the sessions yesterday, but we've got all of the other services, for example, some of your line of business information. And it's really talking about a paradigm shift inside of your organization, right? It's you as a user and thinking about how the content and the conversations come together. So the conversations could be coming from Exchange, right, inside of your regular email. They're coming from Yammer, those kind of conversations. You're also getting content from SharePoint, from OneDrive, from whatever line of business system that you're using. And you're managing the permissions of all of those things from Active Directory. It makes it a really, really powerful format. You know, what we see right now is very nascent still with Office 365 groups, right? We see that we can do calendaring and we can do document conversations and we get all this stuff together, right? But it's really that structure of being able to coalesce all of these different things together so you as a user will see what you need to know about, right? So does that help to configure in there? Okay, all right, good. So I wish, Microsoft would make that very clear. They don't make it very clear right now, but it's okay. That's all right. They're working on it. So, public and private groups, it's a big consideration in terms of authentication. The next, really, the options are around permissioning. So another exciting topic, right? Permissions and single sign-on. So the first thing you want to think about with that is your web part permissions on the specific pages. So you may be doing already audience targeting. You may have role-based targeting for your web parts. You might want to think about how do I expose feeds in certain groups or certain topics to certain roles. So you can really think about that from a usability standpoint, right? What kind of experience do I want to deliver to my user and then be able to tag a specific group or a specific topic or specific areas so that that role is being surfaced the conversations that they want from your social network. We can also think about the other aspect of this in terms of what other single sign-on scenarios do we want to enable inside of our organization. So do you guys have a bunch of users in your company who don't have email addresses? A bunch of people who have frontline workers or people who just don't have Exchange addresses, right? So that's another big scenario that you have to look at. So if you have kind of what I call a dark workforce, right? The sort of dark matter in your company, right? Folks who are working oftentimes in retail jobs, in manufacturing facilities, people who never had sort of email before, right, inside of the organization. So that's another option there, is like understanding how do I enable that scenario for these folks. So you can, in terms of single sign-on inside of Yammer, actually use Active Directory and Federation services to enable users without email. And users without email, really, you have to use something else as a UPN. So it could be your employee ID, it could be whatever you want to set up inside of your address list in your Active Directory. You can also do that inside of Azure AD also, right? That's a great option in terms of I want to take the domains that I have on-prem, I want to be able to coalesce that with a list of people that I may be working with who are sort of consultants, who may not be part of my team all of the time, and I want to be able to manage all of those permissions. So it's another thing you have to think about, right? When we set that use SSO to be true, it's another thing we have to think about in terms of the configuration and how we're actually going to present this kind of data on the web page. So, it's important, the more personalized our intranet gets, the more social our intranet gets, the more that feed has to be very specific. It's all about you, right? That's what we're essentially doing. We're taking it from being the corporation pushing out the information to really understanding how we can personalize for people, right? And showing the relevant feeds. Which means, of course, there's a lot more, testing and things that are coming down to us as IT folks to make sure that people are getting the right experience. There's a couple of gotchas I want to mention. One of the things is on Yammer, there's a default option to have a usage policy pop up, which is actually something I recommend all the time. Do you guys use that right now? If you have a usage policy to accept on the network? Yes? If you're on, you should be using it. So I'm going to say that. So best practice for Yammer, I would always say if you're a larger organization, is to have a usage policy and have it be a policy that people accept before they actually come onto the network. But if you do that, one of the options inside of Embed is that if people haven't accepted that usage policy, they're actually going to get an error in Embed when they first see it. So they'll be in the SharePoint page and they haven't accepted it, they're going to see that, right? They're going to have that little error code there. So make sure in your sort of onboarding experience, when you're bringing new users into Yammer, you want to make sure that they have actually accepted that usage policy before you get there, right? So they don't have that negative experience. The other aspect of this is we talked a little bit about browser compatibility too, but also there's the idea of trusted sites. So you might have seen inside of IE, if you've been using some of those before, you may have seen some of the content didn't come up, right? Some of the images, some of the blob content, basically, that's being stored out there. So there's a range of trusted sites, and there's also a brand new IP address that just came out yesterday from Yammer, because they're moving to the Global Foundation Services as part of Azure. So that's another thing you have to be aware of. These things have to be in your browser, they have to be rolled out to users, and you've got to make sure all of this stuff is actually working for users before they even look at the embed feed, because otherwise they're going to get weird errors. They're going to be like, why can't I see the pictures, right? They don't understand why, and then, you know, by the time it gets to the help desk, you'll never figure it out, right? So these are the things you have to figure out ahead of time and making sure that that experience is there. There's a couple of other things we can do, and there's a custom embed events that are available to you. So Eric's going to talk us through those.
Will do. Was there a question?
Go for it. Go to the microphone. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on, guy. Go on. Get up.
See,
get up. So, yeah. You make me work hard. You're going to have to work hard too. Come on. So that's how that works. So.
You're just saying currently there's no way to restrict permissions for users to prevent end users from creating groups. Do you know if that's going to be coming down the line at all?
Yeah, right now there is no way to do that on Yammer, right? That's the idea of Yammer, is really to have that transparency and allow people to create groups that make sense for team working.
So there's no plan for that to come forward?
I wouldn't get my hopes up. I'm just going to say that, okay? All right. So it's a default network, and, you know, the way that things are supposed to work from a transparency perspective. I think there'll be some more management capabilities around metadata services, and I think we'll see a few more things that maybe you can curate ahead of time as a knowledge manager or as a community manager.
Cool. So Naomi already alluded to this, that there's another feature with Embed that is not widely known, and that's there's an eventing system. Basically, you can use JavaScript to get told when things might happen with the embed feed on a specific page. There's 4 major events: if someone is logged in, if someone is logged out of Yammer, if there was an error, and after the Yammer embed feed is ready to load. Using a very simple, you're able to bind to one just using this yam.on. You can unbind to yam.off. 3 major parameters: the event you want to listen to, your own callback function that you want triggered, that you want to actually fire when this event occurs, and then if you want the context sent along, you can do that as well. Now, I think, like, why might this be used? Now, let's say someone comes to your site and they've not yet logged into Yammer, and so they see an embed feed and they need to log into Yammer. They've now logged into Yammer. Now, maybe you want something to happen on your page. You might want to welcome them. You may want a pop-up to occur. You may want more elements to load on the page because now you know they're already logged into that embed feed. I think that's a really great use where you might be using this eventing system. There's got to be more, Naomi. What else can we do?
A couple of the other things I've worked on before have really been administration-type applications. So with the concern of, hey, anybody can create a group, there's always this concern when you're implementing Yammer that people are going to do terrible things on our network, right? They're going to suddenly turn into awful cussing people who post cat pictures all the time. Okay, it doesn't happen. Just want you to know that does not happen. Okay, but people do have this concern. So if you're thinking about keyword monitoring, if you're thinking about administration feeds, right, and you have a mobile application that you design for folks, you might want to actually think about, you know, showing that feed coming up first, right? So you're going to load up the Yammer embed content first into the mobile device, and then you're going to put the rest of the user experience around it. And that's just a good way to be able to use this kind of loading capability. We're hoping that in the future there will be even more custom embed events, because we think this is really a cool platform part of Yammer, and we'll see, you know, really what they're going to do from the future.
I think it's a pretty good idea. I mean, it's not quite the REST API, but it gives you some extra ability on how you can work with embed. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good time now. Let's go ahead and see some things that we've done in the past. This is what we can show now is a project that Naomi and I recently helped a client deploy. So let's see what we can do outside of embed. Now, this is still embedding or including Yammer to SharePoint, but we can do more.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to know, how many people have red tab jeans on today? Come on, Levi Strauss, come on. Wear them proudly. Thank you. All right. So this is a great client to work with recently. We just implemented Yammer there, and we rolled out this specific integration into their intranet too. So we wanted to walk you through a few things here. So most importantly, in terms of what they wanted to do and their goals, but then thinking about, you know, how it is that they've implemented, and maybe this is a good relevance point for you guys too. So first off, we were trying to really add some interactivity to the corporate communications content. So this project was really sponsored, and sort of the way that things roll out at Levi Strauss has really been looking at sort of making a viral adoption inside of the organization, but very much an organic growth kind of project. This is not something where it's like, oh, top down, everybody shall use Yammer and everybody shall use this kind of thing, right? Not that kind of culture. So inside of Levi's, what was important to them was the ability to have this kind of organic structure, and then ability for people to actually add social interactions onto existing content. So the corporate communications department was already publishing a lot of different articles out there. They have a very cool intranet, which is called Threads. Really cool, right? I like the name, right? You gotta like that, right? So if you have Threads intranet, right, you're pushing out information already about, what's going on. Maybe there's community projects inside of the organization. You're looking at what people are designing, things that are in the news, all that kind of stuff. The corporate communications was right now, they were sending out a lot of different emails, right? And if there's one thing we don't want our users to have, it's more email, right? Yes? Okay. So it's really important to be able to say, okay, I'm going to share this stuff out there, but we're going through some transformation inside of the company. And we're thinking about what we can do in terms of the culture and to make people feel empowered. And so, maybe we can add some interactivity to this stuff, right? Instead of it just being corporate communications pushing out all of these articles, maybe instead we can actually add some conversation in there. And so this was a great use for embed, right? It's a great way to sort of surreptitiously put Yammer under the covers, right? Have that conversation engine start there. You've got content that's being formed onto your Yammer social network, but you're also using SharePoint in a very familiar experience for them. So great win, right? Seems like a good idea. So we also wanted to think about what other behaviors and culture changes we were trying to do inside of the organization. It's really important at Levi's that people have that buy-in, that consensus kind of building culture, and they really need to engage that inside of the organization. They've gone through some transformation recently, so again, understanding that we're appreciating what employees are saying, we're appreciating how they're interacting, and that they have a channel to be able to talk to corporate communications and others inside of the organization. So one of the wins really for us was really simplifying the number of email communications that were going out there, but it was also really important for us to onboard a lot of users. So within the first 30 days, basically by putting in something that's very similar to Yammer Embed, and we're going to show it to you in just a second, we were able to onboard about 2,000 users, right, surreptitiously, without them knowing there was another new system behind the scenes, right? And it's just a really good way to be able to do that. So we're going to show you a few things.
So let's just quickly look at the homepage here. This is the corporate homepage they have. You could do all this with embed. We decided to use REST API because we wanted to work with we wanted to tighten the brand, but that's the value. You get to see both embed, but all these components could have been done with embed. On the left-hand side, in that railed experience that I talked about, they have a nice group feed. That's the CorpCom group feed. That's a CorpCom group where the CorpCom manager is able to post these messages and then people can then like and reply to. On any given article that you see on the right-hand side, that's just a roll-up. At every article, you probably can't see it, it's a little heart. It's a little button that allows you to like, and there's a like count there. That's all being able to be pulled from the REST API. Now, if you click on an article, what happens?
Oh, wow. We get one of those special Open Graph objects that I got so excited about, right? So corporate communications. So here we have an article that's out there. We're talking about the Community Day project, right? And we can see that Community Day project, but we can see that we're able to do some interactions, too. So up in the top-hand corner there, you can see that you can follow this object, right? You can like this object. You can interact with this object. And it makes it very simple, right? Branding, very important to this company. So for them, as Eric mentioned, we had to use the REST API because they like their red little tabs, right? It's important to them, right? You can kind of understand that, being Levi's, right? So, but we also want to have that community interaction underneath. So the ability there for people to put their profile pictures, right? They're able to put in their comments. They'll be able to have that sense of community and be able to actually put their little articles and posts inside of there. So we're actually listening to the employees, right? We're changing some of the culture by saying, hey, we want this interaction from you, and we want to help also to populate our Yammer network in the, behind the scenes. So, Open Graph is a great way to do that. And then we can resurface this content later on in different ways and in different methods, as we showed you earlier. So, there's a few things that we have to think about, right? So if we think about where we've been, we've talked about why we should socialize the intranet. We've talked about how we can use embed. We've talked about all the other places where you could use embed inside of our organizations. And then we've walked through a little bit of a case study. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about governance and considerations that we have around some of these issues. So these are kind of implementation learnings, things that I've done. I've deployed a great many enterprise social networks over a great many companies. And so I'm trying to sort of try to give you a little overview overview of some of the cheat sheet kind of things that you need to know about. The first thing is there is no free lunch, right? The strategy stuff, right? We have to have community managers. If you were in my session yesterday, you heard me say community management is essential to success. So if you're going to have Yammer inside of your organization, you must have community managers, right? Doesn't matter if they're just dedicated people. You probably heard from some of the customer panels this week. There are a number of people who do this stuff in their free time. There are also, crazy people like us who are on the Office 365 network who do this stuff for free also, right? I look after the Yammer help group and I answer stupid questions at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why I do it, but I do it. I feel the need to. I feel I have the knowledge. We must share, right? So there are people inside of your organization. You will find the passionate people with Yammer. It's incredible, right? So having that idea of what, from a strategic standpoint, what do we want to do with community management? Where does this fit with our knowledge management strategy? Understanding how we're going to support and maintain some of these solutions. We've all been through these cycles, right? I'm guessing that none of you guys is young enough to have been through your first intranet sort of portal sort of cycle inside of the company, right? We've gone through these cycles where we do the heroic effort, and then we look at the next wave and we're going, oh my gosh, really, we have to do this again. We have to redesign the intranet for the umpteenth time, right? Had that problem? Yes? Okay, right. So really we want to think about it. Let's do it a little bit more strategically this time, right? Let's see where things are going into the future and how much we can engage social feeds in there and how much interaction and engagement we want from our users. So really think about that from a strategy standpoint before you put any of this code on the page, right? Let's think about it before that. The next thing is this whole idea of the evolving intranet. Right? We really are seeing the transformation in social intranets and what's going on. We really want to think about what more we could do inside of our organizations, right? We're going to get this blend of applications coming. It's not just about static content anymore. We've got applications coming in from HR. We've got applications coming in from other organizations, right? We've got finance applications. We've got travel applications, things that we're building these solutions inside of SharePoint. How are we going to add the interaction that we want inside of the page? And where does that business value really come from, right? We have to be very clear, again, with the use cases for this kind of stuff, we have to define the business value. The next part of this is really understanding around extranets. So we've talked about intranets today, right? The social intranet. But now we have this kind of merge, right, that's going on. It becomes this spectrum. It used to be, here's the intranet. Here's this great big firewall, right? And then here's the sort of extranet kind of capabilities. But the world is changing, right? We've heard a lot this week about, digital transformation. We've heard about the modern workplace. We've heard about the rise of all the contractors and the skills. And many of you folks in the room are probably consultants, right? Or you're sort of contracting into organizations. So thinking about what we can do from an extranet perspective becomes even more important. But that actually becomes strategic inside of your company. Because it's not just enough about the contractors who are inside of your organization and the suppliers and the partners you have, it's also about customers. And customer conversations are the most important thing that you have in terms of conversations inside of your organization. They really help to understand how you're going to develop products, how you're going to develop services, how you're going to make things better, right? You're going to learn that feedback. And how can you do that? Right? Yammer has this whole capability around external networks. And that makes it really exciting, right? It's thinking about what could I do? What kind of conversations could I capture in my Yammer external networks and actually bring that into my intranet? Think about what kind of extranet experience I'm giving to my customers, to my partners, to my suppliers. How do I capture the knowledge that's going on in those conversations? Instead of letting it be an email and sort of whittle away in some account manager's mind, I'm going to take that conversation and use that same engine that I have the conversations with in a Yammer external network, and then I can actually take it into things like Salesforce, take it into Dynamics, and bring all that conversation together. And that's what becomes really powerful, right, is when we use all of these tools together, right? It's not just about one tool and one platform. It's really about how do we bring all this conversation together and make a CRM process, make a customer relationship management process, an account management process, and make it truly social. So we can't do things like, people often ask me, hey, Yammer, is this like a internet forum? Can I just use it out my site? No, don't do that, okay? Just don't do it, right? I'm just going to say that, right? Don't have anonymous commenting, right? You can sort of fake it if you need to, but please don't. The other idea here is really understanding what other capabilities you have in the hopper. So there are lots of different collaboration tools, right? There are lots of things available to you, like external messaging. If you were in the Yammer roadmap session, you probably heard about the external messaging. It's called codename Flexternal, right, inside of Microsoft. that allows you to add people to different threads with an email address if they're external to your organization. So think about all the different ways that there are to achieve those goals. And that's why it becomes really important, again, from that strategy, from that business value standpoint, to identify all the tools that you have available to you and bring that conversation and that content together. So we have to think about those ways of working, how that process is going to work inside of our organization, and then think about the bigger picture. So the next thing is really understanding here, I've got this little box at the bottom here. It says capturing conversations and conversations in context. So think about that document conversations panel I showed you, right? I had the Office 365 video there. I could have had PowerPoint document. I could have had a Word document. And I have that document conversations panel on the side, right? And so that conversation, that context that goes with that content is going everywhere inside of your network. And you can surface that up. So what are we going to do in terms of our social intranet? How is that going to evolve inside of our organizations? We're really going to think about, ideation. We're going to think about serendipitous connections inside of our organization, because that's the source of innovation, and that's what we want to have creating inside of our company. We want Yammer in terms of happy accidents, right? That's the whole benefit of having an enterprise social network. It's about communications and collaboration. It's not about locking down the groups. It's not about locking down how people interact. It's about people learning very fast and very quickly from each other and getting that information exchange. Learning to learn faster is the only competitive advantage, right? It really is. Learning to learn faster. It's the same in your careers as it is in your companies, right? So if we learn to learn faster, we get that process, it really comes down to that. So when we're thinking about the bigger picture, we want to look in terms of, what we're doing in terms of the ease of maintenance for the team and the content owners, right? We're looking at the sites that we're supporting. We're trying to put together a structure for them that's actually maintainable, so we don't go through this heroic effort every, year or two on redesigning the intranet yet again, right? We want to actually have an evolution instead of a massive redesign. Nobody appreciates a massive redesign, right? You can't find the stuff you remember where it was before, just as you learn the new stuff, it's all gone away again, right? So really thinking about that evolution and how we can actually maintain these solutions, and then really understanding the organizational requirements, right? The value, the life cycle, the content, all of the things that we're going to be storing in there, and understand how important those things are, and give us some sense of how important that information is therefore to manage. So let's talk about, what we've had today, right, in terms of the summary.
We've got about 4 minutes, so let's go ahead and just quickly review and recap. But don't worry, I know that we both speak very fast. We're so passionate about this. We've got so much we want to cover. You can always get all this information, again, back at Channel 9. We've also got a whole bunch of material that Naomi will talk about in a second. But what we looked at was, why should you socialize your intranet? We looked at the quick wins, that being Yammer Embed, what it was, how to configure it. Then we showed how to use it. We also looked a little bit on design and UI considerations. And then we looked at other things you need to worry about, like governance and single sign-on and whatnot. There are some other Yammer sessions out there. There's a whole bunch tomorrow. The one that we really wanted to highlight is tomorrow, 9 a.m. There is a session on the REST API. So if you really want to see how you can get more integration with Yammer outside of Embed, where you have a lot more control, please do go to that session. So with that, what I want to know, Naomi, is what do we want them to walk away with? What's the most important thing that we talked about today?
All right. See, should I make you guys answer that? All right, put you all on the spot? No. So hopefully we've taught you a little bit in terms of how to make your intranet more interesting, right? It's all about these quick wins, right? We can use Embed in a simple way, but we can also add these social gestures. So even if you're the most conservative company in the world, and I think I've worked with many of them, right? You can still follow, you can still like, you can still share. Everybody wants to do those things, right? We know those experiences. And hey, if you did find the, the deep dark URL that was really important to somebody, like the travel request form or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Having a share button on there is really awesome, right? Because that means they can actually share that content out with other people who really need to know about it. So we also want to think about, which of the right components to use and when we're using them on our pages. We want to think about also that whole collaboration stack that we have access to, right? I think it's most important to really consider, here are all the options, here are all the tools that we have available, and then think about how can I best use this component. So we want to say that Embed is one of those components. It's one of those tools you're going to use inside of your social intranet. It's a big one, for sure, if you want to drive Yammer adoption also inside of your company. But it's really thinking about how to make it simple for people to use that. We hope that we've given you some great code, right? A good solution in terms of what we can do and making it easy for people. And we have some takeaways listed out there, right? We have the GitHub repo. So please go ahead and download the code, make modifications, use it in your companies. Please. We'd love to hear about how you're using it. And we also have some session videos. So Eric has done a great job in doing the demos and doing a sort of longer form demo, so you can figure that stuff out. And we will post additional articles. We have a white paper that's in the works on this stuff too, and we're going to post that out onto the session Yammer thread probably next week sometime. So we really want to hear from you guys. We're happy to take questions. But I want to say, did you guys learn something today?
Yes.
Was this useful?
Good, thank you.
All right,
Good.
thank you.
That's what I want to hear.
All right.